The wheelchair rolled across polished marble, its wheels leaving faint tracks on a floor so clean, it reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. Malik Anderson studied the blueprint one last time, his dark eyes scanning lines and numbers that most people would never understand. 62 floors, 892 feet, $480 million. The numbers were perfect, except for the ones they erased. His finger traced a deleted line on the screen, following where the seismic bracing specifications used to be. Vibration dampeners, safety margins, redundant support systems, all gone. Removed. Erased from existence as if physics would simply cooperate with a budget spreadsheet. He looked up at the tower through the window, watching the afternoon sun glint off steel and glass reaching into the Los Angeles sky like a monument to ambition. Some men build empires, others save them. This is the story of the man they underestimated. The man who saved 3,000 lives. The man who brought a billionaire to his knees. All from a wheelchair they said would hold him back. If you believe justice is still alive, show us by hitting that subscribe button right now. This is Tales of Black Justice, where we share true stories of people who were pushed down but rose up stronger. Press like button if you stand with those who refuse to stay invisible. The Laxton Development Group headquarters sat in Century City like a glass monument to wealth, 20 stories of premium office space that screamed success with every polished surface. Marble lobbies stretched 40 feet to cathedral ceilings. Gold trim elevators reflected the faces of executives who had never worried about accessibility. But there was one thing this temple of modern architecture did not have: no wheelchair ramps. Malik pulled his van into the parking garage, the modified vehicle with hand controls that had cost him $8,000 he did not have. He transferred to his chair with practiced efficiency, movements smooth and automatic after 15 years of this routine. The chair was a Tie-Lite Aero Z, titanium frame, custom fitted. The kind of equipment that marked the difference between mobility and confinement. 15 years of this routine had made him fast, made him efficient, made him invisible to people who looked right through him. The lobby receptionist looked up from her computer, her professional smile freezing on her face like a video buffer. Her eyes dropped to the wheelchair, then back to his face, then to the wheelchair again, doing the uncomfortable math that able-bodied people always did when confronted with something their building had not considered. "I have a 9 o'clock with Henry Laxton," Malik said, his voice even and professional, giving her no reason to make this difficult. She glanced at the grand staircase leading to the second-floor conference room, the one with the view and the mahogany table and the leather chairs, then back at him. "Let me make a call," she said. Malik Anderson was 42 years old, though the gray starting at his temples made some people guess older. He held a PhD from MIT, a degree that had taken him 7 years of grinding poverty and borrowed money to complete. He had designed earthquake-resistant structures in 3 countries, buildings that still stood in places where others had fallen. His published papers on seismic resilience had been cited 437 times in academic journals. None of that mattered when people saw the wheelchair first. The receptionist returned, her smile now apologetic in that performative way that meant she was following someone else's uncomfortable orders. "Mr. Laxton will meet you in the ground floor conference room instead." Translation: they did not want to deal with the stairs. They did not want to call maintenance to set up the stairlift that probably had not been used in years. They did not want the awkwardness of watching him transfer, of waiting, of acknowledging that their beautiful building had been designed for a very specific type of body. Malik followed her down a side hallway, past the bathrooms and the break room and the supply closet, to a conference room that clearly served as overflow space. No windows, no art on the walls. Fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly and gave everything a greenish tint. The table was folding plastic, not mahogany. The chairs were stackable, not leather. This was where they put the meetings that did not matter. He set up his laptop anyway, arranging his space with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make any environment work. Henry Laxton entered 10 minutes late, which Malik knew was intentional. A power play as old as business itself. White hair perfectly styled. Expensive suit that probably cost more than Malik's monthly rent. The kind of confidence that came from never being told no. From moving through the world with the absolute certainty that doors would open, and people would accommodate, and problems would solve themselves with enough money thrown at them. "Mr. Anderson, thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, practiced, the grip of someone who had read that a good handshake showed character. Behind him stood Tom Briggs, the project manager, a man in his late 40s with the soft middle and expensive watch of someone who had stopped doing actual work years ago. And Jessica Hartman, a junior engineer, younger than the others, still wearing the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone new to corporate politics. Malik shook hands with each of them, noting the fraction of a second delay before Tom took his hand, the unconscious hesitation of someone recalibrating expectations. "Thank you for the opportunity," Malik said simply, no extra words, no performance of gratitude. Laxton sat at the head of the table, because of course he did. "Your reputation precedes you. MIT, R up, Thornton Tomasetti. Impressive resume." He said it like he was reading from a script, like he had already decided this meeting was a formality. "I do good work," Malik said simply, because reputation meant nothing if the buildings did not stand. "We need someone for structural oversight. The Laxton Tower, 62 floors, downtown LA. Mixed-use commercial and residential." Laxton slid a folder across the table, the glossy kind with artist renderings that made buildings look like jewelry boxes catching sunlight. Malik opened it. The preliminary designs were ambitious, pushing the limits of what steel and concrete could do. Aggressive even, dancing right up to the edge of engineering margins. "Timeline?" Malik asked, already seeing the problems. 12 months construction. We break ground in October." Malik looked up. "That is fast for a building this size." Fast meant corners cut. Fast meant change orders ignored. Fast meant safety reviews rushed through. "We have investors waiting. An IPO planned. Time is money, Mr. Anderson." And there it was. The real priority. Not safety. Not quality. Not longevity. Money. Malik studied the seismic specifications, running calculations in his head even as he read. They met California minimums. Barely. Like a student who aimed for a D- because it was technically passing. "Los Angeles is earthquake country," Malik said, keeping his voice level and factual. "I would recommend additional bracing, tuned mass dampers, higher safety margins." Tom Briggs shifted in his seat. The movement of someone preparing to defend a decision already made. "The building meets all legal requirements." Legal. Not safe. Legal. "Legal and safe are not always the same thing," Malik replied, and he watched Tom's jaw tighten. Laxton smiled, but it did not reach his eyes, did not soften the calculation happening behind them. "We appreciate thoroughness, but we also appreciate efficiency. Can you work within our budget?" It was a test. A trap, really. Say yes and compromise your standards. Say no and lose the job. Malik met his gaze, held it long enough to make a point. He thought about his rent. $1,400 a month for a one-bedroom in Inglewood that had been $1,400 last year and would probably be $1,600 next year. His modified van that needed new hand controls, a $3,000 repair he had been putting off. His savings account with $2,000 in it, which sounded like a lot until you remembered that a medical emergency or a job loss could drain it in a week. "I can work within reality," he said carefully, "and reality says LA is overdue for a major earthquake." "Noted," Laxton said, in the tone of someone who had already stopped listening. "When can you start?" Malik took the job at $95,000 a year. It was good money. Not great for someone with his credentials, someone with a doctorate from MIT and a decade of experience. The able-bodied engineers with his resume were making $130, $140. But jobs that did not require climbing stairs, that did not require site visits to construction zones with mud and uneven ground, that did not require the physical stamina that people assumed you lacked when they saw wheels instead of legs. Those jobs were harder to find. His office was on the 3rd floor. At least they had an elevator, a grudging acknowledgement of federal law. He unpacked his things with the ritualistic care of someone setting up a new workspace. Laptop, 15-inch screen, nothing fancy but reliable. 2 external monitors he had bought himself because the company's standard was one tiny screen that gave him headaches. A worn seismograph from Nepal, the portable kind that fit in a backpack, its casing cracked and repaired with epoxy. It still worked. It had worked when the ground opened up and swallowed buildings. It had kept working when everything else stopped. An MIT diploma on the wall, the frame slightly bent from too many moves. A framed photo of a collapsed building with a younger version of himself standing in front of it. Back when standing was something his body did automatically. Back when he could still stand. Jessica appeared in his doorway, holding a coffee mug with the company logo. "Need help setting up?" Her tone was friendly, genuinely helpful, the kind of offer that came from someone who had not yet learned corporate distance. "I am good, thank you," Malik said. But he smiled slightly to show he appreciated the gesture. She noticed the photo on his desk, her eyes drawn to the rubble and devastation. "Where was that?" Her voice had changed, become softer, more careful. "Kathmandu, 2015. She did the math in her head. You could see it happening, her expression shifting as she remembered the news footage, the death toll, the international relief efforts. The earthquake, the devastation. Were you there for the relief effort? She asked, hoping for a story about humanitarian work, about helping rebuild, about something that made sense in a narrative she could understand. I was there when it happened. The words landed heavy. Her eyes dropped to the wheelchair. She opened her mouth, closed it. Social training, fighting with curiosity, fighting with sympathy, fighting with horror. Malik saved her the awkwardness, giving her the short version, because the long version was not appropriate for a first-day conversation. The building fell on me. I got out. 23 others did not. Simple. Factual. Leaving out the hours pinned under concrete. The screaming he could still hear in quiet moments. The moment he realized his legs were not responding to his brain anymore. I am sorry, Jessica said, and she meant it, you could tell. So am I. That is why I take safety seriously. She nodded and left, and Malik turned to his computer. He pulled up the Laxton Tower plans. The full architectural and structural drawings. Thousands of pages of specifications and calculations. Started running structural analysis. Load calculations accounting for wind and earthquake, and the weight of 62 floors of people and furniture and systems. Seismic simulations that modeled how the building would respond to ground motion, to shear waves, to the violent shaking that turned solid ground into liquid motion. The numbers came back the same every time, regardless of how he adjusted the variables. This building would not survive a major earthquake. 3 weeks into the project, after late nights and weekend work that nobody asked for but the building demanded, Malik submitted his first safety report. 27 pages. Detailed structural analysis. Computer models showing stress points and failure modes. Photographs from Nepal that showed what happened when corners were cut. Recommended additions. Enhanced seismic bracing throughout the vertical structure. Vibration dampening system at the top floors to counteract sway. Reinforced core structure with additional steel. Additional cost, $12 million. It was a lot of money. It was also 40 lives saved per $1 million spent, if his calculations were correct. And his calculations were always correct. Tom Briggs called him into the conference room 2 days later, the nice one on the second floor this time, which meant someone had arranged elevator access. No Laxton this time, which told Malik everything about how seriously they were taking this. We got your report, Tom said, dropping the printed pages on the table between them like evidence of a crime. It is excessive. It is necessary, Malik replied, keeping his voice level because anger would give them an excuse to dismiss him as emotional, as difficult, as unable to handle the pressure. We have engineers who say otherwise. Which engineers? Malik wanted to ask. What were their credentials? Had they run the simulations? Had they built in earthquake zones? Had they ever seen a building fall? Then your engineers are wrong. Tom leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that cost $800 and came with lumbar support, and looked at Malik like a parent dealing with a difficult child. Mr. Anderson, we hired you for oversight, not to redesign the entire building. I am doing exactly what you hired me for, keeping people safe. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge neither man wanted to back down from. The building meets California code, Tom said, falling back on legal minimums like they were a moral shield. Code is a minimum, not a goal. It was something his MIT professor had said, drilled into them over and over. Code is what keeps you out of jail. Engineering is what keeps people alive. Tom closed the folder, the gesture deliberate and final. We will take it under advisement. Translation. They would ignore it. They would file it away. They would pretend this conversation never happened. Malik wheeled back to his office, hands gripping the push rims hard enough that his calluses burned. He sent a follow-up email. Detailed, professional, urgent. Attached the full report again plus supplementary data. Used phrases like catastrophic failure and loss of life, because maybe seeing it in writing would make it real. It went unanswered for 3 days. When the response finally came, it was 2 sentences from a project coordinator he had never met. Your concerns have been noted. The project will proceed as planned. Ground broke in October, a ceremony with golden shovels and hard hats that had never seen actual construction sites. Malik attended because he was expected to, because absence would be noted and used against him later. Media, investors, city officials who smiled for cameras and shook hands and pretended they had read the safety reports. Laxton gave a speech about vision and progress and the future of Los Angeles, about creating jobs and building community and contributing to the skyline. He used the word innovation 7 times. He did not use the word earthquake once. Malik sat in the back, wheels locked, watching and calculating. Watching the angles of the foundation excavation. Watching the soil samples being loaded into trucks. watching the surveyors mark positions with laser precision, calculating load paths and stress points, and the moment when all this ambition would meet reality. After the ceremony, as investors networked and cameras packed up, he approached Laxton near the catering table. "Did you review my safety recommendations?" Laxton smiled, the practiced expression of someone used to deflecting without seeming rude. "We did, very thorough. We will implement what we can within budget constraints." "All of them are necessary," Malik said. "Not as an argument, but as a fact. Like saying water is wet or gravity exists. I'm sure you believe that, but we have financial realities to consider." Financial realities, as if physics cared about quarterly earnings. "And I have structural realities to consider. Buildings do not negotiate with earthquakes." Laxton placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. The gesture meant to seem friendly, meant to seem like camaraderie between professionals. It felt condescending, felt like being patted on the head. "Mr. Anderson, I respect your expertise, but I have been building in this city for 30 years. Trust the process." Malik watched him walk away, watched him rejoin the investors, watched him laugh at someone's joke. He did not trust the process. He trusted physics, and physics was undefeated. November arrived with the kind of Los Angeles weather that made people forget earthquakes existed. Clear skies and 70 degrees while the rest of the country froze. The foundation poured, thousands of cubic yards of concrete flowing into forms, hardening into the base that everything else would stand on. Steel beams rose, workers in hard hats and harnesses moving with practiced efficiency, welding and bolting and building upward. Malik reviewed every blueprint, every change order, every material specification, attended every safety meeting, the weekly sessions where contractors reported progress and problems were supposedly solved. He took notes. He asked questions. He submitted his concerns in writing because verbal warnings disappeared, but emails were evidence. Slowly, quietly, he noticed changes. Not dramatic ones. Not the kind that would trigger automatic reviews. Small modifications. Value engineering, they called it. Optimization. Efficiency improvements. The seismic bracing he recommended, reduced by 40%. The dampening system, changed from required to optional. The reinforced core, value engineered down to standard specifications. Each change saved money. Each change reduced safety margins. Each change moved them closer to catastrophic failure. He sent another report, then another. Each one disappeared into the void of corporate email, gone into folders that nobody checked, read by nobody with authority to change anything. December brought rain, the first real storms of the season, turning construction sites into mud and complicating foundation work. The building reached 20 floors, steel skeleton visible for miles, already changing the skyline. A site meeting was scheduled, all engineers required, mandatory attendance. Malik arrived at the construction trailer at 8 a.m., the temporary office that smelled like coffee and damp cardboard. Ramp access. Good. Someone had at least thought about that. Inside, Tom was presenting the updated timeline on a whiteboard covered in dates and milestones. "We are ahead of schedule, under budget, exactly where we need to be." He said it like a victory, like being under budget was automatically good rather than potentially a sign of cut corners. Malik raised his hand, the gesture careful and professional. "We are also under safety specifications." The room went quiet, that sudden absence of sound that meant everyone was now paying attention for the wrong reasons. "Excuse me?" Tom said, his voice carrying an edge. "The seismic bracing. It was reduced. That was not approved by structural engineering." Malik kept his voice factual. Kept his tone even, did not accuse, just stated reality. "It was approved by cost management," Tom said. Like that explained everything. Like accountants understood shear forces. Cost management does not understand earthquake loads. Simple. True. Devastating. Tom's face reddened, the flush starting at his collar and rising. "Mr. Anderson, this is not the time or place. When is the time? After people die?" The question hung in the air. Nobody wanted to answer it. A project supervisor spoke up. Older guy with gray hair and 30 years of construction experience. "Is there an actual safety violation? Legally?" It was the question they all wanted answered. The one that would determine whether they had to care. "Not legally," Malik admitted. "Because California code was written for the minimum acceptable risk, not for actual safety. But that does not mean it is safe. Code is what keeps you out of court. Engineering is what keeps people alive." "Then we are fine," Tom interrupted, voice firm, shutting down the conversation. "Let us move on." January came with false spring, warm days that made tourists think Los Angeles had no seasons. The building reached 40 floors, halfway to completion. the midpoint where momentum made stopping impossible. Malik stopped being invited to site meetings. At first, he thought it was an oversight, an administrative error. Then he realized it was deliberate. His emails were answered with one-line responses when they were answered at all. Noted. Under review. We'll discuss. They never discussed. His phone calls went to voicemail. His calendar invites were declined without explanation. He was being erased, systematically removed from the decision-making process, while technically still employed. Jessica started eating lunch in his office, bringing her sandwich and sitting in the guest chair, the only person who still treated him like a colleague, rather than a problem. "They are shutting you out," she said one Tuesday, keeping her voice low even though they were alone. "I noticed," Malik said, taking a bite of the turkey sandwich he made every morning, the routine that saved him $12 a day. "What are you going to do?" It was the question he had been asking himself at 3 a.m. when sleep would not come. "Keep doing my job." She hesitated, clearly debating whether to tell him something, whether loyalty to him outweighed corporate self-preservation. "Tom is telling people you are being difficult, that the wheelchair makes you overly cautious, that you cannot handle the stress of a big project." Malik set down his sandwich, appetite gone. "He said that?" The implication was clear. "Your disability makes you paranoid. Your trauma makes you irrational. Your perspective is invalid because you are damaged. I heard it myself last week." He was talking to the structural team. Malik was quiet for a long moment, staring at the simulations on his screen, the red zones showing where the building would fail, the numbers that did not lie even when people did. "Do you think I am being overly cautious?" he asked, genuinely wanting to know, needing an outside perspective. Jessica looked at the simulations, at the stress analysis showing forces beyond material limits, at the earthquake models showing the building swaying past its breaking point. She had a degree from UCLA. She understood the math. "I think you are the only one being cautious enough," she said quietly. February arrived with actual rain, the kind that flooded streets and reminded everyone that Los Angeles was built in a desert that occasionally remembered it was supposed to be hostile. The building reached 42 floors. A surprise site inspection was announced. All senior engineers were required to tour the construction, to see progress firsthand, to verify that plans matched reality. 42nd floor. Still open framework, steel beams and plywood decking, wind whipping through the gaps. High winds that day, gusts that made the structure sway visibly. Malik got the email at 8 a.m. Tour started at 9. 1 hour notice for something that required planning, that required safety protocols, that required accommodations. He called Tom immediately. "I will need advance notice for site access. Wheelchair-compatible lift. Safety harness setup." The construction elevators were temporary, designed for materials and workers, not for wheelchairs. Getting him up there safely would require a platform lift or a construction basket, equipment that took time to arrange. "We do not have time for special accommodations," Tom said, impatience clear in his voice. "This is a fast-moving project." Fast-moving. As if speed absolved them of responsibility. "Then reschedule the tour." It was a reasonable request. OSHA required proper safety equipment. ADA required reasonable accommodations. This was both. "Or you can sit this one out." The line went dead. Tom had hung up on him. Malik sat at his desk, staring at the phone, the dial tone still buzzing in his ear. They were not just ignoring him anymore. They were erasing him, making it impossible to do his job while maintaining plausible deniability. March brought the kind of heat that made people forget it was still technically winter. 80-degree days and dry Santa Ana winds that made fire season start early. The building reached 50 floors, 10 floors from topping out, the point where the structure would reach its final height. Malik was in his office, reviewing specifications for the mechanical systems, when Tom appeared with 2 other engineers. White, able-bodied, younger. Neither of them met Malik's eyes. "Mr. Anderson, we are reassigning some of your responsibilities." Tom's voice was professionally neutral, the tone of someone delivering corporate decisions without personal investment. "On what grounds?" Malik kept his voice level even as his hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. "Project efficiency. These gentlemen will handle on-site inspections. You will focus on documentation, translation, paperwork. The stuff that did not matter. The stuff that did not influence actual decisions. The stuff they could ignore. And if I refuse?" Tom smiled, but it was not friendly, was not even pretending to be. "Then we will reassess whether this role is a good fit for you." A threat, barely veiled. Quit or be fired. Comply or face consequences. Malik looked at the 2 engineers, waiting for one of them to say something, to object, to show some backbone. They would not meet his eyes. Understood, he said, because what else could he say? Because fighting would give them cause. Because he needed this job. April came with jacaranda trees blooming purple across the city. Beautiful and oblivious to human concerns. The building reached 56 floors, approaching completion. The point where most of the dangerous work was done and finishing began. Late night. Malik was alone in the office, the floor empty except for the hum of HVAC and the glow of his monitors. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. He pulled up the latest building plans, the ones he was no longer allowed to modify, the ones that had been locked behind password protection he did not have access to. But he was an engineer, and engineers found ways around locks. Seismic bracing, minimal. Dampening system, deleted entirely. Core reinforcement, standa. Malik worked through the night, the office dark except for the glow of his 3 monitors, each one showing a different aspect of what he was building. AutoCAD on one screen, the architectural software showing the building in 3 dimensions, every beam and column and connection. Structural calculations on another, formulas and force diagrams that predicted how materials would behave under stress. The seismograph data on a third, frequency analysis showing the exact rhythm of motion that meant survival. He was not changing the approved plans. That would trigger reviews, require signatures, leave traces. He was adding something they would never see, never understand, even if they looked directly at it. A tuned mass damper system. The kind of equipment that skyscrapers in earthquake zones installed to counteract sway, to absorb energy, to keep buildings stable when the ground became liquid motion. Hidden in the mechanical floors, 8 tons of counterweight, steel and concrete balanced on hydraulic actuators, vibration sensors connected to computer controls, all embedded in the electrical and HVAC specifications, disguised as climate control equipment and backup power systems. They would build it without knowing what it was. The construction crews would follow the plans exactly, would install the equipment exactly, would connect the systems exactly, because that was what construction crews did. They built what the plans said to build. And the plans, if you looked closely enough, if you understood the code buried in equipment specifications and wiring diagrams, said to build a seismic safety system. And when the earthquake came, when the ground started shaking and the building started swaying, it would activate automatically. No human input required, no decision to make, just physics responding to physics. He saved the files, encrypted them because paranoia was justified at this point, backed them up to his USB drive, the one he wore around his neck like a saint's medal. Then he submitted them to the system, uploading them to the shared drive where project files lived, where hundreds of documents were added daily, where nobody looked closely at routine updates. Morning came, gray light filtering through office windows, revealing a city waking up to another day. Malik went home, slept for 3 hours, dreamless exhaustion that was not rest but temporary absence. When he returned to the office, the modified plans were approved. Nobody had looked closely enough to notice. Nobody had questioned the additional equipment. Nobody had wondered why HVAC specifications suddenly included 8 tons of counterweight. They had built his Trojan horse and called it air conditioning. May arrived with the kind of perfect weather that made tourists think Los Angeles was paradise. 72 degrees and clear skies that stretched forever. The building reached 58 floors, close enough to completion that marketing materials were being prepared, that lease agreements were being signed, that the building was becoming real in ways that blueprints never were. Jessica came to his office mid-morning, closing the door behind her, the gesture deliberate and unusual. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Her voice was careful, the tone of someone approaching a landmine. Malik waited, hand still on his keyboard, not moving. "That photo on your wall, Kathmandu. You said you were there when the building fell." She was looking at the framed picture, at the rubble and devastation, at the younger version of him standing in front of collapsed concrete. "I was," Malik said, not sure where this was going but sensing it was important. "But you were standing in the photo." Her voice was quiet now, almost gentle, like she was handling something fragile. The implication hung between them. Standing, past tense. "When did you lose the use of your legs?" she asked, finally saying what everyone wondered but nobody asked. "When the building fell." 3 words. Entire lifetime compressed into 3 words. Understanding crossed her face, horror replacing curiosity, the math suddenly making terrible sense. "You were inside?" Her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "I was the structural consultant. 23 people died. I lived," he said it flatly, without emotion, because emotion would break him and he had learned to keep that locked away. "Oh my God." Jessica sat down slowly in the guest chair. processing, trying to imagine and failing because you could not imagine until you lived it. The building was not supposed to collapse. The developers cut costs, removed seismic protection. I warned them. They ignored me. Jessica was starting to understand. You could see it happening, connections forming. Just like here. Just like here. The words hung heavy. The parallel was exact. History repeating because nobody learned, because profit always seemed more urgent than safety, because 2,000 miles in 10 years meant nothing to human greed. Is that why you are so insistent about the safety specs? It was not really a question. She already knew. I counted every name at that funeral, every face. I sat in a hospital bed and read obituaries. University student, shopkeeper, grandmother, teacher. Every single one of them trusted that building to stand. I will not count more. She looked at the computer screens, at the modifications she had started to notice, at the hidden code buried in specifications. What did you do? She whispered, already knowing the answer was something that could get him fired, could get him sued, could get him arrested. What I should have done 10 years ago, Malik said quietly, before the building fell, before the screaming, before 23 funerals, before learning to live in a wheelchair, before all of it. September arrived with heat that made pavement shimmer, the kind of late summer that made fire season terrifying and earthquake risk feel abstract. The building was complete, 62 floors of glass and steel, Laxton Tower, pride of downtown Los Angeles, monument to ambition and efficiency and modern engineering. The grand opening was scheduled for a Friday, invitation only, media and celebrities and investors who had made this possible, catering by a celebrity chef, entertainment by a Grammy winner, speeches about vision and community and the future. Malik was not invited. His name did not appear in the program. His contributions were not mentioned. He was erased from the narrative as completely as if he had never existed. Monday morning, he got an email from HR, the kind of message that meant nothing good. Meeting required. 10 a.m., conference room C, no context. No agenda, just a summons. He knew what it meant, had known it was coming, had prepared for it, even while hoping he was wrong. The HR director was apologetic in that corporate way, that meant the decision was already made, and this was just paperwork. Tom Briggs sat beside her, silent but present, a witness to the execution. Mr. Anderson, we appreciate your contributions to the Laxton Tower project. Past tense. Contributions. Appreciate. All the words that came before bad news. However, we have identified significant cost overruns during the final construction phase. $8 million over budget. She said it like an accusation, like $8 million was his fault, like he had personally stolen from the company. Malik kept his face neutral, kept his voice level. And you believe I am responsible? Your specifications resulted in additional materials and equipment, components that were not in the approved budget. Components. She meant the hidden safety system, the equipment that would save lives, the $8 million that would be worth more than money when the ground started shaking. My specifications kept the building safe, Malik said, not defending, just stating fact. That is not for you to decide unilaterally. The HR director's voice was firm, practiced, the tone of someone delivering verdicts that had been written by lawyers. You exceeded your authority, made modifications without proper approval channels. Tom spoke up for the first time, his voice carrying satisfaction barely disguised as professionalism. You went outside your scope, made changes without approval, cost the company millions. He was enjoying this. You could see it in the slight smile, the way he leaned forward. This was revenge for every email, every safety report, every time Malik had made him look incompetent. I made corrections. There is a difference. Malik's voice remained steady, even as his hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. Corrections to problems you refuse to acknowledge. Corrections that will save lives when the earthquake comes. Not if. When. Because earthquakes in Los Angeles were not a possibility. They were a certainty. When? Tom scoffed. You have been predicting disaster since day one. Nothing has happened. Nothing will happen. You are paranoid. The word landed like a slap. Paranoid. Crazy. Your trauma makes you irrational. Your disability makes you see problems that do not exist. The HR director folded her hands on the table. The gesture meant to look sympathetic but coming across as rehearsed. Regardless of intent, Mr. Anderson, the fact remains that you violated company protocol. You made unauthorized modifications. You cost this company $8 million. $8 million. She kept saying it like it mattered more than human lives. Like money was more real than physics. We are terminating your employment effective immediately. You will be paid through the end of the week. You have 1 hour to collect your personal items. Security will escort you out. Security. As if he was dangerous. as if a man in a wheelchair needed armed guards to ensure he left peacefully. Malik looked at Tom, really looked at him, seeing the satisfaction and smugness and complete certainty that he had won. "You have no idea what I saved you from," Malik said quietly, without anger, just stating fact. "You have no idea what would have happened without those modifications." "You saved nothing," Tom said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. "You cost us $8 million. You violated protocol. You are a liability. Liability, that word. The one that reduced human beings to insurance calculations." Malik lifted his laptop bag from where it hung on his wheelchair, the movements careful and deliberate. He had known this was coming, had prepared for it, had backed up everything he needed. "I hope you are right," he said, and meant it. "I hope I am wrong about the earthquake. I hope this building stands forever. I hope you never have to count bodies and know you could have prevented it." He wheeled toward the door, then paused and turned back. "But if I am right, if the earthquake comes, those $8 million will be the best investment this company never meant to make, and you will have to live with the fact that you tried to stop it." He left the conference room with his head high, rolled past the cubicles where coworkers pretended not to notice, headed to his office one last time. Jessica was waiting there, tears in her eyes. "I heard," she said simply. Malik packed his things. The seismograph from Nepal, the photo of the collapsed building, his MIT diploma. The USB drive was already around his neck, had been there every day for months, containing every email, every report, every warning, every piece of evidence that he had tried to prevent this. "Watch the building," he told Jessica as he packed the last box into his lap. "When the earthquake comes, watch what happens to Laxton Tower compared to everything around it. Watch and remember what they did here. What if you are wrong?" she asked, wanting to believe the best, wanting to think maybe the building would be fine. Maybe Malik was being too cautious. "Then I will have wasted $8 million of their money and I deserve to be fired," Malik said. "But I am not wrong. Physics does not care about budgets or corporate politics or who wins arguments. Physics just is." He wheeled out of the building for the last time, security guard following him all the way to his van like he was a criminal, like he had stolen something instead of trying to save lives. He loaded his boxes into the vehicle, transferred to the driver's seat, started the engine, looked back at Laxton Tower one last time. 62 floors of glass and steel gleaming in the September sun. Beautiful, ambitious, deadly. He drove away. October 6th, 2025. 1 year and 3 days after ground broke on Laxton Tower. Malik was in his apartment in Inglewood, the one-bedroom unit on the second floor that cost $1,400 a month and had the accessible shower he needed. Job searching on his laptop, sending out resumes, trying to explain the employment gap. Trying to explain the termination without sounding bitter or difficult, or like someone who could not work with others. He had $4,000 in savings now. 2 months of rent if he was careful, maybe 3 if he stopped eating out entirely. The modified van needed hand controls replaced. $3,000 he did not have. Job prospects were limited. Structural engineering firms Googled candidates. His name came up attached to Laxton Tower, to cost overruns, to termination. Nobody called back. 3:47 p.m. The seismograph on his desk started beeping. Not the gentle alert for minor tremors, the ones that happened weekly in Southern California, barely noticeable. This was the alarm, the one that meant something serious, something catastrophic. He looked at the reading, heart dropping into his stomach, even though he had known this was coming, had predicted this, had prepared for this. Magnitude 6.8. Not 6.5 like his simulations. Stronger, worse. San Andreas Fault. 29 kilometers from downtown Los Angeles. Close. Direct hit. Exactly the earthquake LA had been overdue for. Exactly the nightmare scenario. His phone started buzzing immediately. Emergency alerts. Earthquake warnings. The automated system that was supposed to give people seconds to prepare, to drop and cover, to get away from windows. 3:47 and 16 seconds. The shaking started. His apartment building swayed. Old construction from the 70s. Not designed for modern seismic standards. Pictures fell off walls. Books tumbled from shelves. The building groaned. Steel and concrete protesting forces they were not designed to handle. Malik gripped his wheelchair, locking the brakes, riding it out because there was nothing else to do. 30 seconds of shaking. Felt like forever. Felt like Nepal all over again. The memory visceral and immediate, the ground becoming liquid. Solid earth betraying the fundamental assumption that down was stable. The shaking stopped. Silence. Then car alarms, screaming, sirens in the distance. Malik grabbed his phone, pulled up the news. Live helicopter footage was already streaming. Downtown LA had become chaos in seconds. Buildings swayed, the kind of motion that skyscrapers were supposed to handle, designed to flex rather than break, to dance with the earthquake rather than resist it. But not all buildings were designed that way. Not all buildings had enough flex. Not all buildings had engineers who prioritized safety over cost. A parking structure collapsed on 6th Street, 5 levels of concrete pancaking down, cars crushed like toys, dust cloud rising. A hotel cracked down the middle on Wilshire Boulevard. The building split like someone had taken an axe to it, half still standing, half tilted at an impossible angle. An office building tilted dangerously on Broadway. 20 stories leaning like the Tower of Pisa, people streaming out in panic. 12 buildings failed in the first 3 minutes. 12 structures that met code, that passed inspections, that were supposed to be safe. 12 buildings full of people who trusted that architects and engineers and building inspectors had done their jobs. The news anchor was struggling to maintain composure, voice shaking as the death toll estimates climbed. Early reports suggest significant casualties. Emergency services are overwhelmed. Multiple building collapses in the downtown area. Malik watched, unable to look away, counting buildings like he had counted names in Kathmandu. 12, 15, 20. Each one a failure. Each one preventable. Each one full of people who had done nothing wrong except trust. But Laxton Tower stood. In the middle of the devastation, surrounded by collapsed and damaged structures, it stood. It swayed, violent motion visible even from helicopter footage, the building moving like a ship in rough seas. But it stayed upright, stayed intact, stayed standing. People poured out of surrounding buildings, panicked and injured and nowhere to go. Streets were chaos. Rubble blocked roads. Dust clouds made visibility near zero. Emergency services could not reach them. Ambulances stuck in traffic. Fire trucks blocked by debris. 3,000 people in the street with nowhere safe. And then someone made a decision. Someone at Laxton Tower, maybe security, maybe management, maybe just someone with common sense, opened the doors, threw them wide, started directing people inside. 3,200 people took shelter inside Laxton Tower that afternoon. Walked through doors into a lobby that was intact, undamaged, safe. Found stairwells that were stable. Found spaces that were not filled with dust and rubble and the smell of death. The only safe structure in 6 blocks. The only building that had not just survived but could actually protect people. Malik watched the helicopter footage. Watched people streaming into the building. Watched emergency responders setting up triage in the lobby. Watched Laxton Tower become exactly what he had designed it to be. A shelter, a refuge. A testament to what engineering was supposed to do. He sat in his apartment, alone, watching the news coverage, and started to cry. Not from sadness, from relief, from the weight of knowledge that he had been right, that the $8 million had been worth it, that 23 deaths in Nepal had taught him enough to prevent 2,000 deaths in Los Angeles. From exhaustion, from vindication, from the bone-deep terror of knowing how close it had been. 3 days after the earthquake, the death toll stood at 74. 74 people who had been at work or at home or going about their lives when the ground betrayed them. 74 funerals. 74 families destroyed. It could have been thousands. It should have been thousands. According to every model, every prediction, every historical precedent for an earthquake of that magnitude in a city that dense. Structural engineers inspected the damaged buildings, trying to understand what failed and why, trying to assign blame, trying to prevent it from happening again. Laxton Tower was scheduled for review, mandatory inspection of all high-rises, checking for damage that might not be immediately visible, stress fractures and compromised connections, and the kind of problems that turned buildings into death traps weeks after the initial event. The lead inspector was from the city engineering department, a woman named Sarah Chen with 20 years of experience and a professional skepticism born from seeing too many corners cut. She had surveyed 12 collapsed structures in the past 3 days, had seen the death toll climb, had walked through rubble that used to be offices and apartments and places where people felt safe. When she entered Laxton Tower, she expected to find cracks, stress damage, concrete spalling, steel connections pulled loose, reasons to evacuate, reasons to red tag the building and declare it unsafe. Instead, she found a building in near-perfect condition. Cosmetic damage only, cracked drywall, broken windows, displaced ceiling tiles, nothing structural, nothing that threatened integrity. Nothing that explained how this building survived when everything around it failed. This does not make sense, she told her team, standing in the lobby surrounded by emergency cots and medical supplies. the building still serving as a shelter. The seismic loading should have caused significant damage. They checked the plans, the ones on file with the city, the approved blueprints that every building had to submit. Standard construction. Minimal seismic protection. Nothing special. Nothing that explained survival. Then they checked the building itself, climbing through mechanical rooms and service corridors, comparing what existed to what the plan said should exist, looking for discrepancies. On the 56th floor, in a mechanical room that was supposed to contain only HVAC equipment and electrical panels, they found it. 8 tons of counterweight, massive steel and concrete weights suspended on hydraulic actuators, vibration sensors wired to computer controls, a tuned mass damper system, the kind of equipment that cost millions, that required specialized engineering, that skyscrapers in Tokyo and Taipei installed to survive earthquakes. This was not in the approved plans, Sarah said, staring at the equipment, trying to understand how it got there, who installed it, why nobody noticed. Her assistant pulled up the construction documents on a tablet, scrolling through specifications and equipment lists, looking for authorization. There it was, hidden in the HVAC specifications, buried in electrical routing diagrams, disguised as climate control and backup power. So subtle it looked like normal equipment unless you knew what you were looking for. Who designed this? Sarah asked, already knowing this was the answer. This was why the building survived. They traced the file metadata, digital fingerprints that every document carried, author and modification date and approval chain. User ID M. Anderson. Last modified, April 14th, 2025. 5 months before the earthquake. 6 months before the building was completed. Sarah pulled up the employee records, finding a photo and basic information. Malik Anderson. Structural engineer. Employed January through September 2025. Terminated for cost overruns. She looked at the photo. A black man in a wheelchair. Professional headshot. Intelligent eyes. The kind of face that belonged to someone who understood things deeply. Then she looked at the equipment again. At the 8 tons of steel that had saved 3,000 lives. Find him, she said to her assistant. Find him now. The story hit the news within hours, spreading through social media faster than traditional journalism could keep up. Mystery system saves Laxton Tower. Hidden earthquake protection saves thousands. Who is M. Anderson? The narrative was perfect for viral spread. Underdog engineer. Fired for doing the right thing. Secret hero. Building saved by someone who was not even there. Reporters found his employment records, the termination notice, the complaints about cost overruns. They found his MIT dissertation, Seismic Resilience in High-Rise Structures, published in 2015, freely available online, prescient in its predictions. They found his work history, Arup, Thornton Tomasetti, 3 countries, dozens of buildings, a career of making structures safer. They found his publications, academic papers with titles like Tuned Mass Dampers, in High Seismic Zones and Cost-Benefit, Analysis of Enhanced Seismic Protection. They found evidence that he had been warning about exactly this scenario for years. They found his photo, a black man in a wheelchair. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The man they underestimated. The man they fired. The man who saved them anyway. Social media exploded. Twitter threads analyzing the engineering. Instagram posts calling him a hero. TikTok videos explaining tuned mass dampers to Generation Z. The narrative wrote itself because it was too perfect not to be true. News vans appeared outside his apartment building in Inglewood. Reporters knocked on his door, called his phone, sent emails. Everyone wanted the interview. Everyone wanted the story. Everyone wanted to know why he did it, how he did it, what he was thinking. Malik did not answer, did not open the door, did not respond to messages. He had said everything he needed to say in the engineering. The building spoke for itself. The FBI opened an investigation 4 days after the earthquake, not into Malik, into Laxton Development Group, because if an engineer had to hide safety equipment in the specifications, if modifications had to be disguised and smuggled into plans, that meant someone had prevented proper safety measures. That meant someone had prioritized profit over lives. That meant crimes had been committed. Malik was interviewed in his apartment. 2 agents in suits sitting in his small living room, digital recorders running. Everything official and documented. They were respectful, careful. They understood what he had done and why. Mr. Anderson, we need to know what happened at Laxton Development. We need documentation. Malik reached for the USB drive around his neck, the one he had worn every day for 6 months, the one that contained everything. I have been waiting for someone to ask, he said, removing it and handing it over. On the drive, original building plans with proper seismic protection. His safety reports, all 27 pages, dated and detailed. emails showing cost-cutting, correspondence where he warned about earthquake risk, documentation of every modification made to reduce safety margins, and evidence that Henry Laxton had personally approved the removal of seismic bracing, that Tom Briggs had suppressed safety reports, that the company had systematically chosen profit over safety while knowing the risks. "This is comprehensive," one agent said, scrolling through files on a laptop. "Why did you keep all this?" "Because I knew the earthquake was coming," Malik said simply. "I knew someone would want to know why people died. I wanted to make sure they had answers." The agents looked at each other, a silent conversation happening. "Mr. Anderson, what you did, hiding the safety system in the plans, that is technically fraud. You modified approved documents without authorization." "I know," Malik said calmly. "I am prepared to face consequences." The agent shook his head. "The U.S. attorney does not see it that way. You saved 3,000 lives. You acted to prevent catastrophic loss when your employer refused to. That is not fraud. That is heroism. Heroism." Malik did not feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had done basic math and followed through. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we build a case against Laxton Development. Against Henry Laxton. Against everyone who chose money over safety. And you, Mr. Anderson, you go back to being an engineer." "I was fired," Malik reminded them. "No firm will hire me now." The agent smiled slightly. "I think you will find that has changed." November. 3 weeks after the earthquake, Henry Laxton was arrested at his Bel Air mansion. Helicopters filming as federal agents led him out in handcuffs. The footage played on every news channel. The billionaire in designer clothes and handcuffs. The man who built an empire on cutting corners. 23 counts of safety violations, each one a felony. Shareholder fraud for lying about construction costs and safety compliance. Perjury to the grand jury when he claimed ignorance of the modified plans. Wire fraud for using email to coordinate the cost-cutting. His assets were frozen immediately. Bank accounts, properties, stock holdings, everything. His company declared bankruptcy within a week, unable to operate without access to capital, unable to find investors willing to touch a name associated with negligence and death. His tower, the one with his name on it, the monument to his ambition, was sold to the city of Los Angeles for $70 million, a fraction of its value, sold to cover debts and legal fees. In February, 7 months after the earthquake, Henry Laxton stood in federal court for sentencing. The judge was a woman in her 60s who had lived through 3 major earthquakes and had no patience for men who played games with public safety. "Mr. Laxton, you had every advantage: wealth, education, opportunity. You chose to use those advantages to cut corners and endanger lives. 74 people died in this earthquake. 3,000 more would have died in your building if not for the actions of an engineer you fired for trying to keep them safe." She sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison, $50 million in fines, permanent ban from the construction industry. His empire was gone. His reputation was destroyed. His name was permanently associated with negligence and greed. Tom Briggs was fired the same week Laxton was arrested. He faced no criminal charges, but his career was over. No firm would hire the man who suppressed safety reports. He moved to Arizona, got a job selling insurance, never worked in engineering again. Reporters found Malik in San Francisco 6 weeks after the earthquake. He was reviewing blueprints for a high-rise in the financial district, sitting in a temporary office space he was renting by the week, doing contract work for a firm that suddenly very much wanted his expertise. "Mr. Anderson, the city of Los Angeles wants to offer you a position. Director of Building Safety, $175,000 a year, full benefits, your own department." Malik looked up from the plans, considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds. "I appreciate it. Is that a yes?" The reporter had his phone out, ready to record the acceptance, ready for the feel-good ending. "That is a no." The reporter blinked, confused, the script he had prepared falling apart. "You are turning it down? This is a major position, recognition, influence." "I do not want a title," Malik said, turning back to the blueprints. "I want to do the work." "What work?" "Making sure this never happens again. And I cannot do that from a city office attending meetings and managing bureaucrats." The reporter persisted. "But you could change policy, write regulations, have real impact." Malik looked at him directly. "Regulations do not save lives. Engineering saves lives. Good design saves lives. I am an engineer. That is what I do." He went back to the blueprints, effectively ending the interview. The reporter left, confused but with a good quote. 3 months after the earthquake, Malik started a nonprofit, Resilient Futures Initiative. The mission was simple: provide scholarships for disabled students studying structural engineering, mentorship programs pairing students with experienced engineers, Job placement assistants helping graduates find positions in firms that valued competence over appearance. 20 students in the first year. All minorities, all disabled in some way, all told by someone, somewhere, that they could not do it, that engineering was too demanding, that they should consider something easier, something more realistic. Malik met with each of them personally, told them about Nepal, told them about Laxton Tower, told them that the world needed engineers who understood that safety was not optional. He also took consulting work, independent structural reviews, the kind that developers hired when they actually cared about doing things right. High-rises, bridges, stadiums, schools, hospitals, buildings where failure meant death. He charged premium rates, $120,000 a year working 3/4 time, flexible schedule. No office politics, no corporate games, just engineering. He stayed in his apartment in Inglewood, the $1,400 one-bedroom on the second floor. People asked why. He could afford better now. Could buy a house. Could move to a nicer neighborhood. "I like it here," he said simply. And he did. He did not need a mansion. Did not need to prove anything. He needed to sleep at night. Needed to know that when the next earthquake came, the buildings he touched would stand. That was enough. In March 2026, 5 months after the earthquake, California passed new building safety laws. The legislation had moved through Sacramento faster than any building code revision in state history, propelled by public outrage and media attention, and the fresh memory of 74 funerals. Independent structural review became mandatory for all projects over $50 million. No longer could developers hire their own engineers and trust them to police themselves. Third-party review. Objective analysis. Someone with no financial stake in cutting corners. Criminal liability for executives who knowingly reduced safety features to cut costs. Not civil liability, criminal, prison time. Personal consequences for decisions that endangered lives. Mandatory disclosure of all value engineering that affected safety systems. Public record. Transparent. Available for review by anyone who wanted to look. People started calling it Malik's Law. The nickname spreading through social media and then being picked up by legislators who recognized good branding. Malik never asked for the recognition. Never lobbied for the law. Never testified before committees or gave speeches about policy. He just kept engineering, kept reviewing plans, kept catching problems before they became catastrophes. But the law passed anyway. His name attached to it whether he wanted recognition or not. Laxton Tower was converted into affordable housing and a public emergency shelter. The city spent $12 million renovating it, turning commercial space into apartments, turning the lobby into a community center, turning a monument to one man's greed into something that actually served people. A plaque was placed in the lobby, bronze with engraved letters, mounted where everyone entering would see it. This building stands because one man refused to stay silent. This city survived because one man refused to give up. When they tried to erase him, he became permanent. Below the text, a name, Malik Anderson, P.E., Ph.D., and below that, a quote from his MIT dissertation. The purpose of engineering is not to build monuments to ambition. It is to create spaces where humanity can thrive safely. All other considerations are secondary. Malik visited once, 3 months after the renovation was complete, after residents had moved in, after the building had become something other than a crime scene. He rolled through the lobby, reading the plaque, saying nothing. A resident approached him, an older Latina woman with a walker, someone else navigating the world on wheels. "You are him," she said, not a question. A statement. "I am an engineer," Malik said. "You saved my grandson," she said, tears in her eyes. "He was working downtown that day. He ran into this building. He is alive because of you." Malik did not know what to say to that. Did not have words for the weight of being responsible for someone's survival. "I am glad he is safe," he said finally. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for not giving up." He nodded, wheeled away, left the building and drove back to San Francisco where another project waited. Another set of plans to review. Another building to make safe. There is a particular kind of strength that comes from being underestimated. When people see your wheelchair before they see your PhD, you learn to work in the shadows. When they doubt your capability based on what your body cannot do rather than what your mind can accomplish, you learn to let the work speak. When they erase your name from projects and exclude you from meetings and treat you like a problem to be managed rather than an expert to be consulted, you learn that recognition is not the goal. Safety is the goal. Lives are the goal. Everything else is ego. Malik Anderson never wanted to be a hero. The word made him uncomfortable, made him think of people with capes and superpowers, made him think of recognition he did not need and attention he did not want. He wanted to be an engineer, He wanted buildings to stand when the ground shook. He wanted people to go home to their families. He wanted 23 deaths in Kathmandu to mean something, to teach lessons that prevented future tragedies. That was all. That was everything. They told him his disability made him weak, told him he was being overly cautious, told him the wheelchair affected his judgment, made him see risks that did not exist, made him paranoid and difficult and unable to handle the pressure of major projects. They fired him for caring too much, for spending $8 million they did not want to spend, for prioritizing lives over quarterly earnings. They tried to erase his contributions, remove his name from documentation, pretend he had never been part of the project. But steel remembers what paper forgets. Buildings remember who designed them. Physics remembers who understood its laws. 3,200 people went home to their families the night of October 6th, because one man refused to compromise. Because one man remembered 23 funerals and decided never again. Because one man understood that code was a minimum and engineering was a calling. 74 people died in buildings that cut corners, that valued profit over safety, that met legal requirements while failing moral ones. 74 deaths that could have been prevented, should have been prevented, would have been prevented if other engineers had followed Malik's example. That is the difference between greed and conscience, between building to code and building to last, between doing the minimum and doing what is right. Some heroes wear capes and give speeches and bask in recognition. Others wear credentials nobody bothers to check, work in anonymity, and measure success in lives saved rather than fame earned. Some heroes stand tall on stages and accept awards. Others sit low in wheelchairs and see farther, understand deeper, care more. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet as a hydraulic actuator engaging during an earthquake, patient as an engineer working through the night to add safety features nobody asked for, built into the foundation where nobody thinks to look, where executives never bother to read specifications, where accountants see only line items rather than lives, invisible until the moment it matters, and then the ground shakes, buildings fall, people scream. Death comes fast and arbitrary, and in the chaos one building stands, one structure survives, one monument to proper engineering becomes a shelter for thousands. And only then does the truth emerge, only then does the shadow become visible, only then does the architect step into light. Malik Anderson is back in the shadows now, working on another project, reviewing another set of plans, catching another developer's attempt to cut corners. His name is not on the building, his photo is not in the lobby, but his work is in the steel and concrete, in the systems that will save lives during the next earthquake, in the foundation that will hold when everything else fails, because that is what engineers do. That is what justice looks like when it is built rather than spoken. This is the legacy of the shadow architect. Not fame, not recognition, not monuments with his name, just buildings that stand, just people who live, just physics respected and corners not cut, and the quiet satisfaction of doing the right thing even when nobody is watching, especially when nobody is watching. Because the ground will shake again, the earthquake will come, and when it does, the buildings that survive will be the ones designed by people who cared more about lives than profits. The structures that stand will be monuments to competence over greed, conscience over convenience, engineering over ego. That is Malik's law, not the legislation in Sacramento, not the regulations and requirements and mandatory reviews. The real law, the one that matters, the one that physics enforces without mercy. Build it right or watch it fall. Cut corners and count bodies. Prioritize safety and save lives. Simple, immutable, true. And somewhere in the shadows, an engineer in a wheelchair is making sure the next building follows that law. Not because anyone is paying attention, not because he will get credit, but because 23 people died in Kathmandu, because 74 people died in Los Angeles, because 3,200 people lived in a building he designed, because that is what engineers do. We build things that stand. We protect people who trust us. We refuse to compromise even when compromise is easier. We work in shadows because shadows are where the real work happens. And we measure success not in dollars or fame or recognition, but in simple, undeniable fact. The building stood. The people lived. The ground shook and we were ready. That is justice. That is strength. That is the quiet triumph of competence over prejudice, knowledge over ignorance, preparation over panic. Some men build empires. Others save them. And the ones who save them rarely get monuments. They just get to sleep at night knowing they did their job. Knowing that when the ground betrayed everyone else, their buildings kept faith. That is enough. That has to be enough. That is everything. This is Tales of Black Justice. Malik Anderson saved 3,200 lives from a wheelchair they said would hold him back. He spent $8 million they said was wasted. He built safety into a system designed to erase him. And when the earthquake came, when the ground shook and buildings fell, his work stood strong. If you believe that competence has no color and courage has no height requirement, subscribe now. Hit the bell. Share this story. Because the world needs to know that the people they underestimate are often the ones holding everything together. The people they exclude are often the ones with the most important contributions. The people they erase are often the ones who save lives. True strength is invisible until the moment it is needed most. True engineering is silent until the ground shakes. True justice is patient until physics demands an accounting. And that moment always comes. The earthquake always arrives. The test always happens. And when it does, we learn who built for show and who built for survival. Who prioritized profits and who prioritized people. Who met code and who exceeded it. Malik Anderson exceeded it. And 3,000 people are alive because he did. Remember his name. Remember his work. Remember that expertise comes in all forms. That brilliance uses wheelchairs. That heroes work in shadows. And that sometimes the person everyone dismissed is the person everyone needed. The ground will shake again. Make sure you are in a building designed by someone who cared enough to do it right.